Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at.
Oh, this is a good one.
It is a really good one. It's President Trump's executive order that kind of slams the brakes on the
Yeah,
Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, for those in the know.
right.
We've got some really interesting sources to unpack here. And this is
Yeah.
I think, more interesting than.
Juicier than you think.
Yeah, than people would think. Yeah, we're talking billion-dollar settlements, international incidents,
Mm-hmm.
and now a really uncertain future for this whole thing. So let's dive into the world of the FCPA.
Okay.
All right, so first things first. For someone who vaguely remembers a headline about this, what is the FCPA all about?
So at its core, the FCPA is a law that says U.S. companies and foreign companies with ties to the U.S. can't bribe foreign officials to get an advantage in business.
So no more suitcases full of cash like in the movies.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about fairness and preventing corruption in international deals.
Makes sense, but this isn't something that's been around forever, right?
No, you're right. It actually came about after some pretty shocking scandals back in the 1970s.
Okay.
Right after Watergate.
Oh, wow.
American companies were getting caught bribing officials all over the world.
That's got to be a PR nightmare.
It was a huge deal, and Congress got really concerned about America's reputation
Yeah.
and how this was damaging foreign policy goals. So they created the FCPA in 1977
Okay.
to try to crack down on this stuff.
So it wasn't just about stopping something illegal. It was also about protecting America's image
Exactly.
on a global scale.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that the FCPA ended up influencing anti-bribery laws
Oh, wow.
around the world. It became a model for what's known as the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention,
Okay.
which was adopted by a ton of countries.
So the U.S. was really taking a lead role
Totally.
in this global effort against corruption.
Yeah, taking a stand.
Right. So let's get to some recent examples of the FCPA in action, because the stuff that you sent me had some big cases in it.
Definitely. We're talking about serious fines here.
Like that one with the Brazilian construction companies?
Yes, back in 2016, they were ordered to pay a combined $3.5 billion
Wow.
USD
$3.5 billion.
in fines.
Wow. That's more than some countries' entire GDP.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money. And it shows how seriously the U.S. is taking this,
Oh, yeah.
enforcing these laws.
And it wasn't just them. I remember reading about Airbus.
Yeah,
They
right.
got hit with something similar, too.
Yeah, in 2020, Airbus agreed to pay almost $4 billion
Wow.
to settle bribery charges in the U.S., the U.K., and France.
Wow.
And they admitted to using middlemen to bribe officials and airline execs to land contracts.
It's like an international crime thriller.
Right.
Billions of dollars, shady deals across continents. Who else has gotten caught up in this?
Oh, there's a bunch. So there was SAP, a German software company.
Okay.
They had to pay $220 million in 2024 for bribing officials in South Africa and Indonesia.
Okay.
And then there's AAR Corp, an American aviation company. They were fined over $55 million for bribing officials in Nepal and South Africa. It's happened all over.
So this is not just some obscure law collecting dust.
No.
It's being used
It has teeth.
yeah, to hold companies accountable. But I gotta ask, do these massive fines actually work
Mm-hmm.
as deterrents? Or is it just like a slap on the wrist?
Yeah, that's a good question. When you're dealing with companies that make billions of dollars each year,
Right.
a few $100 million in fines might not seem like a lot.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if they just see it as the cost of doing business. But I
Right.
guess there's also reputational damage.
Exactly. The potential for damage to their reputation and the threat of individual prosecution for those involved,
Right.
that's a strong deterrent as well. It's not just about the money.
Okay. Before we get to the executive order, can we talk about the elephant in the room?
Let's do it.
Didn't President Trump spend years criticizing this very law?
He did. Back in 2012, he even called it horrible and ridiculous,
Oh, wow.
saying it was holding American businesses back.
But then during his first term, FCPA enforcement went way up.
Yeah, it's true. We saw a record number of enforcement actions in 2020.
Yeah,
Seems like his actions didn't match his words back then.
right.
But this new executive order in 2025 is a huge shift in his approach.
So what's the reason? Why this pause now?
Well, the White House says the FCPA has been overforced.
Okay.
They're arguing that it hurts U.S. businesses and exceeds presidential authority in foreign affairs.
Okay.
They're saying it puts American companies at a disadvantage compared to countries with less strict anti-bribery laws.
So it's kind of like an America First policy, putting American businesses first, even if it means easing up on anti-corruption measures.
That seems to be the message, yeah. But it is important to remember that concerns about aggressive enforcement
Really?
of the FCPA have been around for a while.
Okay.
Mike Kohler, who's a leading FCPA expert, points out that both Republicans and Democrats have been voicing these concerns for years.
Huh. So it's not necessarily about getting rid of the FCPA altogether,
Right.
but refining how it's enforced.
Exactly. There's a feeling that enforcement has sometimes gone too far
Okay.
and put American companies at a real disadvantage globally.
I can see how that'd be a concern for businesses trying to compete internationally.
Yeah.
Like you're a company trying to secure a contract overseas. You're bound by all these regulations,
Right.
but your competitors in other countries aren't.
Right. They're playing by different rules.
Yeah, so that raises questions about fairness.
It's a complex issue for sure, trying to balance ethical conduct with economic competitiveness.
Right. And now with this pause, it feels like we're in uncharted waters.
Definitely we are. And that's what we're going to be talking about in part 2.
Okay. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back, and we got to tackle that million-dollar question.
All right?
What could happen now that there's this pause on the FCPA?
Well, you got to think, if people think they can get away with bribery without facing those U.S. penalties,
Yeah.
some might be more willing to take that risk.
Okay.
Transparency International, which is a global anti-corruption group,
Right.
they put out a pretty strong warning saying this could embolden corrupt actors all over the world.
That makes sense. I mean, if that fear of those serious consequences from the U.S. is gone, it kind of changes the game.
Yeah, that potential for prosecution from the U.S. has been a major factor for a lot of companies and individuals.
So does that mean it's a free-for-all now?
Not quite.
Okay.
Legal experts have been very clear that bribery is still against the law.
Okay.
The FCPA hasn't disappeared. It's just that enforcement is on hold.
Right.
And remember, other laws, both here in the U.S. and internationally, still prohibit bribery.
Okay, so the risk hasn't completely vanished, but it's definitely lower.
Yeah, for now, that's the perception, and perception can be powerful. And that's where the uncertainty comes in. We're in uncharted territory now. No one can say for sure how this is going to play out long term.
It's like watching a high-stakes chess game.
Yeah.
The U.S. made a big move, and everyone else is trying to figure out their next play.
I like that analogy. Will other countries ramp up their own enforcement to fill the gap left by the U.S.? Will this lead to a global decline in anti-corruption efforts? These are big questions.
Yeah, and then what about the impact on American businesses? Some are saying that this pause levels the playing field, letting U.S. companies compete more effectively in markets where bribery is already happening.
That's the argument, that U.S. companies were being held to a higher standard, and that put them at a disadvantage. But others say this sends a dangerous message. It's basically like saying it's okay to be unethical as long as you're making money.
So it's like this moral dilemma.
Totally.
Is it okay to compromise your ethics to be competitive?
It's a tough question. There's no easy answer. You have to weigh the interests of American businesses against the importance of ethical conduct in international dealings.
And then there's the whole issue of presidential authority.
Oh, right.
The White House is saying that the FCPA steps on the president's toes when it comes to foreign affairs.
They're arguing that the president should have more flexibility in deciding how to enforce this law, especially when dealing with foreign governments.
But critics are saying that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
It could weaken the rule of law and give the president too much power.
That's a valid concern. It raises questions about the separation of powers and checks and balances, which are really important for our democracy.
Okay, so what happens next with the FCPA? What's the next chapter in this whole saga?
So the executive order put a 6-month hold on most FCPA investigations by the Justice Department.
So a timeout while they figure things out.
Exactly. Attorney General Pam Bondi is in charge of reviewing and potentially revising the FCPA enforcement guidelines. And she can also extend this pause for another 6 months if she needs to.
So it's like a pause for reflection,
That's right.
a chance to reevaluate how the FCPA is enforced and maybe make some changes.
The goal, according to the White House, is to find a balance between helping American businesses and keeping up ethical standards in international business.
A delicate balance for sure. But you said most investigations are on hold.
Right.
Are there any exceptions to that?
You're right. There are a few. Attorney General Bondi has told prosecutors to prioritize FCPA cases that involve cartels and transnational criminal organizations.
So the big players, the ones doing really serious crimes?
Yeah.
They're still on the radar even with this pause.
Precisely. The focus seems to be on shifting resources away from those smaller infractions and towards the cases that have a bigger impact on national security or global stability.
That makes sense. So while some companies might be breathing a sigh of relief, it's not a total free pass.
It's not. And it's important to remember that things are still developing. Those revised guidelines haven't been released yet. So we'll have to wait and see what specific changes are made.
So a lot of unknowns and plenty of room for things to change in the coming months.
Definitely.
This is definitely a story we need to keep following.
Absolutely. The potential impact of this pause is huge.
Yeah.
And it could have a lasting effect on the fight against global corruption.
It's a reminder that doing business internationally is complex, with ethical considerations often tied to economic interests.
And finding the right balance within that web.
Right.
That's the challenge for those making policy and those running businesses.
And speaking of challenges, what if we put ourselves in Attorney General Bondi's shoes?
Ooh.
You're the one tasked with revising those FCPA guidelines.
Okay.
Where do you even begin?
That is a great question, and it's one we're going to be tackling in part 3 of our deep dive.
All right.
Join us as we explore those potential revisions to the FCPA and all the debates surrounding this very complex law.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive on the FCPA.
It's been a journey.
It has been. We've covered so much from the history and how it's been used to what this executive order might mean going forward.
Yeah, a lot of potential ripple effects.
Absolutely. So let's try a thought experiment here. Imagine you're Attorney General Bondi.
Okay.
You're the one tasked with revising those FCPA enforcement guidelines.
Oh, boy.
Talk about a challenge trying to find that sweet spot between supporting American business and upholding these ethical standards.
It's a delicate balancing act for sure. Where would you even start?
I think I'd start by really listening to both sides. You've got the business community saying the FCPA is putting them at a disadvantage.
Right.
And then you have those anti-corruption groups worried about bribery skyrocketing if we weaken enforcement. So finding a solution that addresses both of those concerns, that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, understanding all those different perspectives.
Right.
That's key. It's not about picking a side.
Right.
It's about finding that common ground.
And maybe part of that solution is clarifying exactly what the FCPA covers.
Oh, interesting.
Some experts have said it becomes too broad.
Okay.
Like it covers so many things that maybe aren't actually bribery.
I see what you mean. So the new guidelines could lay out specific examples of what crosses the line.
Exactly.
That would give businesses clearer direction.
And remember those facilitation payments we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
Technically, they're allowed under the FCPA, but that line between a facilitation payment and an actual bribe, that can get really blurry.
It's such a gray area. Maybe the revisions could set some clearer criteria to help companies know the difference.
Right, and navigate those tricky situations.
Exactly.
I also wonder if we could have a more tailored approach to enforcement.
Okay.
Instead of just those giant fines.
Right.
Maybe there could be other penalties.
Like what?
Like mandatory compliance programs.
Okay.
Or even more oversight for those repeat offenders.
I think that's a really valid point. A one-size-fits-all approach might not always be the most effective.
Right, so tailor the consequences to each case.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't forget about the global picture.
Yeah.
If the U.S. steps back from FCPA enforcement, will other countries follow, or will they step up and fill the gap?
That's the big question, isn't it? The U.S. has been leading the charge against corruption.
Yeah.
If they pull back, it could embolden those who are engaging in it worldwide.
Right.
But it could also be a chance for other countries to take on a bigger role.
It's like this delicate ecosystem. Change one part, and it affects the whole thing.
It really does. So if you were Attorney General Bondi, you'd have a lot to juggle.
How much?
You got to support American businesses while upholding ethical standards, provide clear guidance, make sure the deterrents actually work, and navigate this whole world of global anti-corruption efforts.
It's a tough job, but it's so important.
It is.
These changes to the FCPA guidelines are going to have a ripple effect.
Yeah, this is a story we need to keep our eye on for sure.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has given us so much to think about.
It really has. This whole situation with the FCPA and this pause, it raises these fundamental questions about ethics in international business.
Right, how do we balance those national interests with global responsibilities?
And what does fighting corruption actually look like?
These aren't just theoretical questions.
No.
They have real-world consequences for everyone, businesses, governments, individuals around the world.
So as we all go about our day, let's think about these things. How do we encourage fair competition while still upholding those ethical standards?
Right. How do we navigate this globalized world
where
different cultures and legal systems are always bumping up against each other?
It's complicated, but they're questions we all need to think about.
I agree.
Because fighting corruption is a shared responsibility.
Absolutely.
It takes collaboration, transparency, and a commitment to doing business the right way, even when it's hard.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And be sure to stay tuned as this story continues to develop.
298.